Well, for better or worse, primaries are proceeding today. Lord knows why, Sagar.
Well, joining us now to weigh in on this is Ryan Grimm. He's the D.C. Bureau Chief of the Intercept, and of course, he's a great friend of the show. Ryan, thanks for joining us and putting up with our virtual studio here. How are you?
It's lovely to see you guys.
Yeah, absolutely. I wish it was in person, but we'll just have to make do. Ryan, you have been... Yeah, fair enough. I am an unpleasant person. Ryan, tell us a little bit about... I mean, you have been tracking this so closely about the decision of these states to go forward with the elections at this time. And I think, as you saw with Ohio, is that pressure, basically, from the outside has at least gotten that governor to try and extend the election to June 2nd, but there's still two other states that are going on right now. Just talk a little bit about the internal decisions of each of these states in order to go forward with the election.
Well, hilariously, Arizona made the most prudent move when months and months and months ago, they said on the Republican primary side, look, dear leader Trump is going to be renominated, so why are we even bothering having a primary? And they just gavelled it to a close. So Arizona is not even having a Republican primary. And what's staggering about these states, so you have Illinois, Ohio, Florida, and Arizona. 3 of those had Republican primaries scheduled. So you were going to drag hundreds of thousands of Republican voters out to the polls, spreading this disease among each other and to everybody else in the polling place and everybody else they contact and come into contact with on their way out of their house and back, in order to nominate Donald Trump in a completely uncontested primary. Now, the Democratic one is slightly more alive, so you could argue that it ought to go forward. But there has been a ton of pressure as the disease has kind of spread exponentially around the country, and Ohio finally moved yesterday. The governor, it was a fascinating turn of events. The governor said, I am going to shut this down and I'm going to go to the courts to order them, to give me the authority to shut it down. And what he basically did is he found a handful of elderly voters who argued that they would be disenfranchised. So the governor didn't sue himself. He used these elderly voters to say, CDC says we can't show up, therefore you can't have a legitimate election. A judge said no. That this would set a terrible precedent. You can't just shut down an election. And it looked like it was going forward. And then the judge, in a remarkable joint statement with the health commissioner, the secretary of state himself, said, okay, you know what? You want to have an election, fine. But the health commissioner has the authority to declare a public emergency, and we're shutting these rooms down. Go ahead, have your election. But you don't get to use the elementary schools, the churches, all of these public spaces where the CDC says you can't have, more than 10 people, congregated together without, risking a potential of a dangerous spread. The other state, three of these 4 states, Ohio, Arizona, and Florida, these are the oldest states, some of the oldest states in the country. And Florida and Arizona are like, nah, we're good. Illinois is like, no, we're good. We're gonna push ahead with this, and and it's thoroughly irresponsible. And both Bernie Sanders and Joe Biden have not been taking leadership on this either. Joe Biden would rather send his elderly voters to the polls and risk their lives and the lives of their loved ones to drive a stake into the heart of Sanders, because he knows he has momentum, and if he can finish him off right now, then he's the nominee. But Sanders too he's said, look, I leave it to the governors. It doesn't seem to make much sense, but he hasn't been firm in telling his people that they shouldn't vote, or saying that the elections shouldn't go forward.
Yeah, I mean, it's clearly like a partisan position from Biden and from the Democratic establishment, Tom Perez and all the rest, who are like, we must go forward with these elections, period, end of story. Doesn't matter what the CDC says. Doesn't matter what the public health cost potentially is. So they're not afraid of coming down on the side of what they believe will benefit them politically. But I think Bernie has been nervous, even though he is on the right side of the public health guidance, of taking that strongest stand for fear that it looks to be partisan and political.
Right. Maybe he thought, like, okay, these are 4 states where, he's polling an average of 30 points down. And so it looks maybe too clever for him to say, let's pause on these primaries. But you in a crisis like this, leadership means pushing all of that aside and doing what's right. Whether or not it's popular or not. So Ohio, good for it, is going to be locked down today. But these other states, and we're going to find out. We're going to get these numbers. We're going to find out. In 2 to 3 weeks, are there going to be people who are dying?
And Ryan, just to shield
made right now.
Right, and Ryan, just to shield you even from political prognostication, you have said, okay, if you're not trying to shield anybody by saying, you said, okay, if these elections continue, then Bernie should suspend his campaign in order to show leadership, and in order to say, you were like, look, Biden's not going to do it, so somebody needs to protect seniors. Just talk about that, because I know you took some blowback for it.
Yeah, I've been desperately throwing whatever I can find against the wall to try to get people to take this seriously. The first thing that Jeremy Scahill and I threw out there was like, okay, look, what's the best case that can come out of this worst case scenario? Stop the primary right now and just call it a Biden-Sanders ticket, and march into the general like that. That lasted about an hour until the debate where Joe Biden
said he's going to pick a woman.
Saying he's going to pick a woman. We'll see if he follows through on that. I can't imagine why he wouldn't. So much for that. Okay, so then what? So clearly Joe Biden and the Democratic Party is insisting on not just putting the people at risk who are heading out to the polls, but putting the millions of people who interact with the hundreds of thousands of people or millions of people who go out to the polls over the next few weeks. Like, all of those people are being put at risk by this decision. And so, I put together a little checklist in my newsletter last night about whether or not you should go out and vote tomorrow. The CDC says, if you are elderly, you should stay home and away from people. That is their firmest, clearest guideline. No ifs, ands, or buts. If you're elderly, stay home and stay away from people. Okay, so that's everybody who's elderly should not vote. Okay, so then after that it says if you have an underlying health condition related to heart disease or some type of respiratory disease, then you're in a high risk category. You should not vote. Okay, that's millions more people. Then if you're somebody who is likely to come in contact with somebody who has one of those first two things over the next 2 weeks, then you should not vote. Then, if you are somebody who's likely to come into contact with somebody who's likely to come into contact with somebody who's elderly or has one of those underlying conditions, then you should not vote. And you very quickly understand that the guidance applies to nearly everybody. And anybody who is going to do anything other than leave their apartment alone, go to the polls with their gloves on, wipe down the thing and then put their mask and then go back to their apartment and not leave it for 2 weeks. Everybody else, according to the CDC, should not vote. If the Democratic Party is insisting on pushing the country into a deeper pandemic, then, I said, look, Bernie Sanders should take leadership and say, I'm not doing this. I'm boycotting this. I'm suspending my campaign. Now, it wouldn't have totally worked because there's still a Republican primary. There are congressional primaries. There are local elections that are going on. It's not just up to Bernie Sanders. But in desperate times call for desperate measures. Now, the fact that it's going on kind of makes that moot. At least Ohio shut it down. But I think at this point, at a bare minimum, Joe Biden and Bernie Sanders should publicly tell their supporters that if they fit any of the things that I listed, that they should not vote. Because let's be serious. Nobody's going to give validity to these elections if Bernie Sanders wins. Let's say turnout is down 90%, and Bernie Sanders wins Florida, Arizona, and Illinois. Do you think the DNC is going to say, well, hey, fair's fair.
Fair is fair. Process is a process.
Process is a process. Bernie's people came out. I guess he's the nominee. No way. They would challenge those delegates. It would go to a fight, and the people that control the process would win that fight.
So, Ryan, what should we be thinking about to plan for November? We don't know how long this is going to last, and we don't know if it could reemerge in the fall.
Right. Yeah. And one of the more kind of persuasive arguments against the idea of postponing the primaries that are happening today was that, well, you're going to give precedent to Donald Trump. But I would say, a couple of things to that. One, Donald Trump has never betrayed any notion that he needs precedent. He's willing to break precedent all over the place. And two, if you push forward with the elections and they are a public health catastrophe, and we're aware of that in a month or two, doesn't that actually give anybody who wants to suspend elections in November more of an argument to do it? And it flows into a bigger conversation about leadership, responsibility, and democracy itself. If the leaders in a democratic republic, do not take this moment seriously and don't take steps, even if they're unpopular, to save the public from absolute disaster, then you're going to have demagogues and authoritarians who are going to come in and say, look, their love of this process is what got you into this mess. I'll clean this up. And, Mike DeWine is a good example. He wasn't exactly authoritarian, but he disregarded a judicial order in order to shut down that election, and he made the right decision. But you don't want people to get into the habit of liking the idea of the one guy in authority making the correct decision.
Certainly.
Well said, Ryan. Thank you so much for being with us. We always appreciate it.
Happy
Thanks,
St.
Ryan.
Patrick's Day.
See you soon. Yeah, happy St. Patrick's Day. All right, we'll have more Rising for you right after this.